Thank you all for being here. So we have Alina, Grabowski, Lee Newman, and Sarah Jessica Parker here today to celebrate the launch of Women and Children First. We're so excited. So I first want to say thank St. Anne's for allowing us to use their space for this event. It's beautiful. If you need to use a restroom at any point, they're through the doors all the way right here. So through those doors, going all the way to the right. At the end of the talk, we'll be doing an audience Q&A via a line in the center aisle. You use this microphone here. So please pick up questions to ask now. And I know you all picked up a book when you purchased your ticket, but in case you want another, we have additional copies available for purchase tonight at the table where you checked in, out there. And Alina will be signing and personalizing books after the talk tonight at a table in the room over there. So we'll have you line up here. So it's so incredible that this assured and gorgeous novel is Alina's debut. Lori Moore calls her an astute and limber narrative artist, and I could read her prose all day long and never grow weary. And Over Daily says, once you get into these women's heads, they will never get out of yours, which I completely agree with. Alina Grabowski grew up in coastal Massachusetts and holds degrees from the University of Pennsylvania and Vanderbilt University. Her writing has appeared in Story, The Master's Review, Joyland, The Android Journal, and Day One. She's received scholarships from Aspen Summer Words, the Sewanee Writers Conference, the Squaw Valley Community of Writers, and the Juniper Summer Writing Institute. She lives in Austin, Texas. Award-winning actor, entrepreneur, producer, designer Sarah Jessica Parker is the publisher of SJP Lit. Founded in 2002 in partnership with Zando, SJP Lit is a book imprint that publishes thought-provoking, inclusive, and big-hearted stories, of which A Quitter's Paradise is the inaugural title. An avid, lifelong reader, Parker also served as editorial director of SJP in Hogarth, where she published the New York Times bestseller, A Place for Us. Parker has additionally served as the American Library Association's Honorary Book Club Central Chair, a board member of United for Libraries, and on the President's Committee of the Arts and Humanities under the Obama administration. These bios are like crazy. The Newman story collection, Nobody Gets Out Alive, Scrivener, 2022, was longlisted for the National Book Award for Fiction, another crazy bio. Her stories have appeared in Harper's, the Paris Review, the Best American Short Stories, the Best American Mystery and Suspense, One Story, Tin House, Electric Literature, American Short Fiction, and McSweeney's Quarterly Concern. Her memoir about growing up in Alaska, Still Points North, was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award. In 2020, she was awarded a Pushcart Prize and the American Society of Magazine's Editors Prize, as well as received the Paris Review's Terry Southern Prize for Humor, Wit, and she currently serves as the books director for Oprah Daily and the editorial director of Oprah's Book Club. All right, so without further delay, please join me in welcoming our incredible guests tonight. Thank you.
Probably like many people in this room, I grew up as a reader. the house with something to read, and that meant even when you were yet able to read. So my mother's theory, my mother was an educator, and she just thought, sort of by osmosis, if you held a book, you would come to love a book. So I grew up in a city that had a lot of wonderful cultural institutions, and we had a symphony orchestra, a ballet, and we would go from time to young because in those days it was affordable and government subsidized. And so we would go to museums and the ballet and the symphony, and at a very young age I would have a book because children get bored. And at a certain point in my life, I'm one of 8 children, books became our choice, and it was no longer my mother telling us we had to leave the house with something to read, but more so we were always leaving the house with something to read. And so if you run into any of my siblings on the street, they'll always have a book in their pocket, a New Yorker folded somewhere. And books for me are, I find it very hard to describe what they mean to me. They're my constant companion, they're my best friend sometimes, they're my gateway to worlds and cultures and tribes and religions and peoples I will never probably get to know or be with or live around or smell or touch or eat their food, you know?
Yeah.
For me, it's a world that it's a way of taking me places that my curiosity is desperate to know. And so at a certain point I had the great good fortune to meet Molly Stern, who you know. At the time, big shot, now she's a big shot editor on her own, but she was a big shot publisher editor at Crown, and we became friends, and we started this book club, which was primarily to read yet to be published books, and primarily in the literary fiction area, which is my favorite. And over the course of a couple of years, she was foolish enough to ask if I would consider and think about publishing, which I thought I was, you know, ill-equipped at best to even consider, but we talked a lot about it, and she assured me that I could learn, which I love doing, and that I would be surrounded by people who were extremely good at what they did, and that it's really more about my love for books that I can perhaps help shepherd titles into the world, and especially the kind of books that I think are so important and stay with you. And so that began, and now I have the great privilege of continuing.
I know. And this book seems, I'll be honest,
this kind of talent.
I do know this book well for different reasons which we won't go into, but when you were just saying, you know, you take a book in your pocket or you don't know. I mean, I can't tell, I don't know who among you here went to a high school party and read. Raise your hand. I couldn't like the depth of the imagination in certain ways. In urban Alaska, and I would read like TV guides. At the night, you know? And, but there is something about the reader being a character in the story, and that every reader is a different character that the writer maybe never anticipated. But that's the creative act, right, of participating. And that is why I just love this book. Because Alina's book has 10 different characters, I believe. So the whole book's focus is around the death of a young woman, and 5 of the characters happen before the woman dies, and 5 of the characters happen after. And it's kind of a continuation of the story. But as a reader, you participate in each one of these 10 young women's lives. Some of the women are in high school in Massachusetts. Some of the women are young women who teach at the high school or parents of the high school children. But as you read through, you become a character because it's all a little small, right? It's a village in the countryside, I mean, not in the seaside of Massachusetts. So then you become a citizen of that town, and you begin to participate. And so I thought maybe we should just take a minute and have our wonderful author read from one of these 10 women. And I really want to
doing it. Thanks. Thank you so much for that introduction, both of y'all. I love what you're saying about participating and the reader being a character in the town, and as Lee was saying, it's split into before and after Lucy Anderson, who is this character that the book revolves around. The perspectives are before and after she dies, and so this is from Ray's chapter, which is after and post. And Ray's going to meet Charlie, who was Lucy's father, and is also Ray's godfather. And so I'll read a little bit from this, about 5 minutes, give you a little taste. The next morning, I meet Charlie at his house for coffee. I've had coffee on his front porch every Saturday since I came back from Los Angeles, and he tricked me into it. Your mother would have wanted it, was what he texted, which isn't exactly a lie, but also isn't the truth. Who knows what that woman wanted? Charlie thinks he knows. He and my mother were best friends since the womb. Their mothers were also best friends, and they were born on the same day, 2 hours apart. Irish twins, as Charlie incorrectly puts it. Technically, he's my godfather, though I don't think any of us believe in that stuff anymore. Even my father stopped going to Mass years ago. He's waiting on the front steps when I pull into the driveway. Ray Van. He locks me in an embrace that smells like smoke and toothpaste. He gave up booze after Lucy, but life isn't worth living without a vice, as he likes to say. He doesn't hide the cigarettes now that Brennan's not around, who is his wife that he's separating from. We sit at the metal cafe table on the backside of the porch, the side that faces the ocean, and he taps open a box of Parliaments. How's that boy of yours, he asks, shielding his lighter from the wind. Charlie's vibe has gotten even more maternal since my dad moved upstate last year, an act that Charlie unfairly interpreted as fatherly abandonment. I'm not deserting you, am I? My father asked after I tugged down the door of his U-Haul, the last box finally Tetrised into a corner. You're 3 hours away, I told him with a laugh. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel differently when the trunk finally disappeared over a hill. It felt like whatever had happened with my mother was finally over, and the only way we'd gotten there was by separating. I'm 30, he's not a boy. He sure sounds like one the way you talk about him. He holds the cigarette between his lips so he can press down on the plunger of the French press. Even now, he doesn't know how to use it without Bryn. He's overfilled it, and the grounds float through the murky liquid like potting soil. You don't have to pretend you're happy, he says, not here. He pours me a mug of coffee, and the surface shines like oil in the sun. I sip it slowly, trying to catch the grounds on my lips before they can filter into my mouth. We're going to break up, I say, startling myself. I hadn't realized I believed this, but now that I've spoken it, I know it's true. Sometimes I think that we already know what our futures hold. We're just waiting for the right moment to stop hiding from ourselves. Charlie's halfway through his cigarette, burning fast. I fan the smoke away from my face. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, he says. You'll be breaking his heart then, just like Corinne called Baskin boys. I don't understand the reference to my mother, so I just smile at him through tight lips. I have thought more than once whether it makes sense for me to keep coming here. Charlie likes to dangle my mother's past over my head like a carrot I should beg him for. Only I'm not hungry. I never have been. Thank you.
As you read, I literally can walk through the sentences with you. I knew we were going to the carrot part and her not going for. How did you, when you read this, I know what it's like to be an acquiring editor. That wasn't on my bio, but for a while I was an editor-in-chief of some different publishing houses. And when you read that manuscript, you go, oh, that's for me. Why?
I didn't. I thought it was for readers. I typically, when you fall in love with something very early on, when you're reading a manuscript, I think I always fear it's not going to be for me. It's going to be for somebody really big
I'm a
and fancy.
narcissist. I'm like, bring it to me.
People want it, but there's also the reality of, the other big people out there who are, people of taste.
The people who have bags of money.
And just mountains of cash, and writers are deserving of that. And I think for all of us who were fortunate enough to read the manuscript early, it just was so clear was a very special book, that this was a hugely gifted writer, and that this was a story, as we've seen the last 2 weeks, and especially the last few days, that people would really respond to. And I don't even mean that it's a commercial book, although I think it has the possibility to really penetrate. I think more so, people are responding to the immediate, there's this immediate thing that happens at the top of the book. There's a character that brings you into this coastal village that is so accurately and vividly described. I've never been there, but it's spot on. And there's a young woman who takes us through this early morning.
Her mother's sick, right?
Yeah, I just feel like I'm very bad at this. Because I never do it justice. I never do it right. And so you'll do that. And I'll simply say that it takes you in like the undertow of the Atlantic. You just are just pulled in. And I knew, I spoke to everybody, Xander, right away, and I was like, I doubt we'll get this. I will never get this. But I want to throw myself in front of the court and plead my case. I remember so clearly meeting you, and you were so lovely and so poised, and so clearly the author of this magnificent book. And we were really lucky that she entrusted it to us.
Right, fiction is immediate like that, right? It's instinctual. Sometimes I think that fiction will break down the wall between your intellect and your instinct. It's one of the few things that writing can do. And I do remember, because I actually skipped ahead of it maybe because I went to school in California, but I realized, because in the second chapter there's a woman who looks for a tech ding-dong. But in the first chapter, it's Jane, and she's working at the local mart, and her mother is sick, we don't know why, and she's having an affair with her teacher, and she's a high school student. And one thing I have learned about being the head of the I mean, I'm not the head, I work at Oprah's Book Club, but Miss Winfrey loves the first sentence. And I have learned to, you can almost tell, is it a good book or not? Look at her first sentence. On the last Saturday in May, I drowned in my sleep. It happens quickly. I'm standing at the edge of the ocean, and when I look down to the water, the wobbly hand of my reflection reaches up to pull me under. Start reading. I'm sorry. You know,
It's a very promising sentence.
you just go, hey,
But
how did you get it? What in the world?
I think I wanted to bring in this idea of the ocean immediately, because that wasn't always the first sentence. But the ocean.
Did you start with Jane?
I did. Jane was always the first thing that I wrote. I wrote an early version of her when I was in college, actually, very different than this, but she really stuck with me because she's a very sort of bold character, and she is kind of convinced that she's the one who seduced her teacher also. She's like, she thinks, and you know, I don't know what my personal take is, but she has agency in the situation. She believes that, which I think is why she's interesting to follow. And she's also sort of feeling like a bit trapped in her circumstances too, and so that dream sort of came to me, that idea within it, to sort of yourself pushing you down. And I thought, oh, that's an interesting place to start the book and sort of start exploring this character as well.
That sounds so technical. Wonderful, I can't even relate. But, no, really, I mean it. But, so it came from like a feeling that you translated into words?
Yeah, because I think the book is so much about atmosphere, also of this town and of the setting. Weather sort of plays a major role too, because when you live by the ocean, like, you're literally kind of watching out the coast also, like the land fall into the sea if you live near the cape, and so it's this very precarious place also, which kind of plays into the situation of the women as well.
You know, I remember there's a line much later in the book where you said, like, when you're in the middle of the ocean, you can't tell which way the tide is going, in or out. And that's why it makes it so complicated. And did you always have that later sentence?
Yes, yeah, I think that was always there, because also like I spent a lot of time in the ocean growing up too, and it's such a, I mean, the tides are just fascinating, and it is true, like when you're in there, you literally have to look at the tide chart, you just don't know, and so I think that was always in there, yeah.
No, I remember I had one sailing lesson. And they were like, look over there, which way is the wind blowing? And I was like, I don't know. I'm from Alaska. I need a mountain. But I will say, it's very interesting to me that you sort of maybe had a map. I mean, I'm only getting it from this moment.
Yeah.
That maybe you had a map in your mind.
We talked about, we did an interview a couple
Yeah.
weeks ago, and I was desperately trying to describe Jane, and then the interviewer asked, how did Alina put it together? And she just, you walk, sorry, I'm so sorry. You walked her through sort of this thing that was happening to you, in a way.
Yeah.
Is that fair? Is that
Yeah, I grew up on the South Shore of Massachusetts, and so I drew on that sort of physicality. This is a fictionalized town, but in terms of like the landscape and the layout, I'm very much thinking about that, because I think for me, what's really like feels framing and creative is like characters and character development. Coming up with like a map and geography, like so I was sort of drawing on this memory I had of a place, which I think also just like looking back sort of nostalgically on where I grew up to had complicated and interesting feelings about that.
And you also, though, I think you were also talking about like all of the people, like how they were all adding up in this place.
Yeah,
Because that's what
Yeah,
I think is really special too about the book, is that there are locals, and they are most assuredly defined a lot by the environment and the circumstances in which they live, but there are these other people who have left and come back and have a lot of feelings about that. And they're all like, it's all adding up in this very interesting way. I know there's a lot of resentment and sadness returning. It's hard, And I just think that's the other thing too that I think is really impressive is it's hard to take care of 10 people.
No, yeah. And actually, really Kittredge, I don't know if you was ever read Olive Kittredge. This is your book. This is her book. It's a different kind. That's Maine, this is Massachusetts. But there's a number of interesting questions that we can ask. You chose to make only basically women characters. And most of them are young women. There's a mother or two in there. But, and then also, I think the whole book is kind of around this premise of this young woman, Lucy, dying, who falls off a deck in a house during a party. But as you read, it's the kind of book you want to read 2-3 times. Not joking, I've done it. And you start to see, oh, there's this spread of this one coach at the high school who has been abusing different girls throughout. Then you start to see that this English teacher, and maybe that's a legacy, right? The younger English teacher is having an affair with Jane, our first narrator, and he kind of is hitting on other girls. And then you start to see that, Mrs. Cushing, who was the head of the high school, is here on the PTA. And then you see, oh, this bar, the locals bar, where they drink beer, I don't know, they shotgun or whatever. And then the other bar, where they have like wine and herbal cheese. And you really start to get this sense of community. But it's amazing how you do it to these narrators. And why, was there some point where you thought, wouldn't it just be easier if I picked one person and we walk through town? Why would I make it this difficult?
Oh yeah, next book is one narrator for sure. And one timeline. But I think this is really a portrait of a place, and of this particular town, and it seemed like if I wanted to represent that, I needed to have a variety of voices to really illustrate the community in this place. And I'm also very interested in sort of like this idea of truth and memory, and how we're all sort of, moving through the world with one particular lens. And, sometimes our memories and our narratives about ourselves and what we've experienced overlap with people who are there, and a lot of the times they diverge also. And so that happens in the book, also share events
but actually she's centered by one character.
Yeah.
And Lucy's always kind of elusively, sorry, out there. We know she's gonna die. We want to figure out what happened because we know maybe it wasn't. She's got seizures. We know that something happened. You might be blame, and that is compulsively drawing you forward. So you want to keep turning the pages.
Yeah.
But it doesn't rely on that. Like that's a conceit too that can be lazily attended to. You know, like this. It is a mystery. It is important. She is a really worthwhile person who died too young. But there's so many examples of what makes Alina special and masterful in this book, and that is that she doesn't exploit. I can't explain it. She doesn't exploit this death, and it has a sort of suspense to it. But other people are equally as important. It's not, they aren't without as much mystery. You're as keenly interested in them. They are as mysterious without having died tragically. And I just think that's really amazing because a lot of them are very young and haven't lived big, long lives yet. So there's not a lot of layers yet.
But you don't ever feel like someone had a truncated life or like a reduced emotional existence on the planet. No.
And they're very different, and so you do want to understand better what happened to this young woman, but the investment isn't just, it's not like a quick, it's not candy, and it's delicious.
I know, but I just wonder too, as an editor.
I'm not an
Okay. I will say,
Anything I had an incredible editor.
yes, I'm so
So
sorry.
no, I actually don't want to take credit.
No,
for
no,
an
no, no.
editorial.
I'm sorry, your editor is, okay, it doesn't matter. But I will say though, when you decide to sign up a book like this, and I do know, because I've been in this situation, you go, this isn't ABC. This is A, Z, G, D, 7, and then we're going to end up with something, and it's going to be very special. But it's going to require kind of a supreme attention.
Yeah,
Kind of a devotion.
Am I crazy? This book did not need a lot of attention. Maybe I.
No, I don't think anything changed.
I think I'm pretty.
Yeah.
Like, am I right, Molly?
No.
Like, this is Molly Stern here, everybody. Don't look behind the curtain. This is Molly Stern. Wizard of Oz. There are some books that you want, even though you imagine that they can use like a really fine hand in there with them. I have no recollection of thinking, thank God we have Emily.
No,
This
this is
is
so
special.
many. I mean, like, this is not the traditional narrative.
Yeah.
So, if you're just out to make money, and you're going, I'm going to make some money on books, which would be hilarious. I heard that. I had thought of that. I'm joking. But it is a special narrative. And so you have like a special, I'm going to guess, we've never met before, but to respond to this way and to understand this book in the deepest way, you're paying attention to all these little things.
I pay attention to every.
I know, the minutiae.
We talked about
Yeah.
that in our first meeting before we were told that we would actually wasn't purchased, not the person, but the title. We talked a lot about those details. I mean, what I love most, in a story is the details. They're everything. They're what makes you think you did eat that food, or cross that bridge, or live in that village, or someone who told you that story, when then you're corrected and said, well, no, that wasn't. No one told you that story. I understand you read that in a book. He didn't tell you.
That's the feeling.
It's those details that I think change everything for a reader, and they matter. And I think it's the reason that things stay in your brain is because it's as lived as it can possibly be, with the exception of actually rubbing it or something. Yes, and she's just. I think she loves. I think you love those details. I think they
Yeah.
do very much. It's the
How long did it take you to write all this? I mean, you literally built seriously, I know it's just a town, but it's almost like a country. I'm like, stop. How long did it take you?
Yeah, it took me probably, I think 8 years, so close to a decade. And I think really to Xander's credit, and when we had our call, the editorial process was really about sort of strengthening the voices and tightening some of the threads, because there is a way where you could make this much more, quote unquote, traditionally commercial, and some editors did say, I want some more closure, know exactly what happens, and this is a book that very much drives ambiguity. And in terms of like crafting the book, I think I was saying this in our other interview, I just had like a circle of all the characters at one point drawing, like just lines to each one to try and figure out, how everyone intertwined, and to make sure that people were also like moving in and out of the story like enough, and that someone wasn't, just sort of a side character that felt like they didn't really deserve to be there, something like that.
Can I ask you a question? Because I always like to ask this, like, did you ever have a breakdown moment? Like, what am I doing? I spent 4 years in this cabin. And I really, it's not confusing.
Why is it always
Like,
happening?
because they go away. They take like one and go away. What happened and how did you get over it?
Yeah, I think there was one point where I was like, I just don't know how to fit this together, and like parts of the pieces are there, but parts of them are not clicking. And I think this is also a book where something sort of, you don't follow your intuition, something feels very forced too. It's very easy to be like, this is planted here to thus connect this thing, and no one wants to read a book like that. But I love all the characters in this book, which is why I spent so much time on it. So ultimately, it was much more about, I want to spend more time with these characters and see what they reveal to me, and then that showed me the way forward. But like, part of a lot of patience. It's not.
Did you come back or were you able to soothe yourself, or did someone soothe yourself?
Luckily, I have a great husband and a great agent, and so they were both very instrumental in that process, because there are also so many people involved in bringing a book, to its final form between two covers, and so also just collaborating with different people and finding the way forward together. And this is so much a book about community that felt really essential to the process too.
I felt like it could be a play. I was like, I kind of felt like, I did. I'm not sure how it would work, because you'd have to make it maybe more forward pushing.
Yeah.
But having that community, remember that movie that with Nicole Kidman, where she had the chalk thing? It was a little bit abusive. That Norwegian. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? There's a guy thing, she would drag a wheel in the whole
Cinema for sure.
And actually, there's a great line. One of the greatest lines of her thing is about in her small town, she makes the independent cinema. And she was like, they only showed, everybody wanted to go to the movie theater where you could lie back and have a margarita 2 towns over. Our town insisted on having movies starring people wearing beige and speaking Nordic languages. And I learned to enjoy the hard, uncomfortable seats because they made you pay attention so you wouldn't fall asleep on the subtitles. I'm totally not getting language right now. People sense. Look, here I thought we would just because there's so many wonderful lines, not just about the town, but about humanity. So I just thought, I'm going to do something called Drop the Needle. This is my book. There must be, there's like 60 documents. I'm going to drop it, and then the two of you will just talk about it. Okay?
Yeah, I feel like this is going to really be Alina talking about it, but
If we could
let's see.
we're not going to let attention get too much. Okay, here's something that she talked about earlier. I don't know anything, I told her. Because that's the thing about people. You only ever see your interpretation of them, not who they actually are.
Yeah, I feel like that's the core of the book. So.
I didn't not pick it for a reason.
But yeah, I I have an only child, and also obviously, so much of my childhood felt like just observing people and families, especially siblings. I didn't have any, and sort of watching the ways they navigated their families and how they each had such a distinct experience of being part of this like shared unit. And that was always fascinating to me because I was like, I've got my own narrative and no one can dispute it because I'm the only one out here. So that was just very interesting to me to watch and witness, and of course like loving both as well, which is the ultimate, multiple perspectives that you have access to. So yeah, I think that's just.
And that's a really driving part about the book is how
I
that.
also think it's a great way, that sentence, to think about these young women, and who they, it's a combination sometimes, and everybody's different, but generally speaking, and there is this, you touch on this in the book, like they're pretending, they're trying to be somebody, they're pretending to be somebody, they're projecting and being projected on, like, oh, you're this, you're that, but really, it's nothing yet. It's not, there is nothing yet. They're not baked. I mean, there are certain things, but they're not for sure yet. And especially beautiful is all these young women and how they imagine each other to be, how good they are to each other, or how much pain they're actually in, but don't, that is, I think, very much the
And how social media, how they're taking videos, or they're looking at each other, or they're watching each other make art, or these girls are all interacting, and it's the opposite of how Hollywood posits us, right? Like Hollywood posits that they're these mean girls, or these not, or da-da-da, and da-da-da. But then if you remember, or even when I watch girls, especially, they're so vulnerable. And they're so actually not out to stab each other. They're more like, I'm trying to survive, and I might push you under, but I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And,
also, I have two daughters who are about to turn 15 next month. And they're also, it's not just that they are mercurial, but they're also, sometimes when they're angry or people disappoint them, they're not really as mean as they think they are about the person. Like, it's a really interesting thing, because I've only hired it because I have a son, but that's a very different experience than a girl, and now two girls, so I'm really getting like a controlled study. Situation, because I'll hear about an event from two people, and it really did happen to both. One saw, and it's very touching in a way that surprised me, because there are all these messages about how, everyone's like, you got two teenage girls, good luck, good luck.
Yeah.
Everybody's like,
Why is that always
they're awful.
Yeah.
And I'm like, who started that rumor? And then why do we encourage it by sort of preparing them for the awful world, which does exist, but it's not necessarily interpersonal. Like, it's so complicated, but I think you do such a good job of really creating girls that are genuinely complicated, not more so than their years allow, but the truth of growing up, learning.
And even the girls in their 20s are stuck between high school and figuring out. They're in their small town, they're waiting at a restaurant, or they're serving as a high school guidance counselor, and they're observing. They're kind of powerless in a way. It's kind of, okay, I want to do one more line, and then I think we're supposed to do questions. I don't actually know what the agenda is, but here we go. It brings me to this one. Ready? I know you better than anyone, my mother says. Which is when I realized that she too can't bear to live in the present. It's easier to graft the earlier version of someone onto their present self than to admit your understanding of their character has eroded.
I feel like in writing workshops you get the classic advice is like choice and change. Every character should make choices and change, and I think there's sort of a rebellion against that, because I think there's sort of this thought now maybe of like, people actually don't change, and people are kind of stuck in their ways, and I actually believe people are very capable of change, but it's very difficult for us to shift our perspective with people that are close to us, because we want to believe that we have this intimate knowledge of them, and if they're growing or changing in some way, it kind of means that, maybe I don't know this person as well as I do, grow and shift without we often want to hang on to these previous versions because it gives us a sense of
Of course we
security.
do.
Yeah.
You want to hang on to it, and then you're enraged by it. Don't you go home to your mother's house and you're like, oh, she's terrible. You're intrigued. But then you like slop down the steps and got like cheese whiz on your mouth. And even.
Dorito dust everywhere.
Yeah. Walk the dog. But this was more complicated because it kind of crystallized for me. I mean, it's a really important moment when you look at your mother and you both realize you want the same thing, which is not the truth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Ow. Are we supposed to take questions? I don't know what we're supposed to do.
Yeah, we're gonna do audience Q&A. You just line up here and come up with the mic.
Oh, I'll be quick. Nice start. I was wondering the question from before that I think you guys got sidetracked into a very interesting other conversation, but I was wondering what other books you were inspired by that had multiple points of view.
I'm going to repeat that because we're doing a live stream,
Okay.
not because I didn't hear you. Okay. What other books inspired Alina?
Multiple points of view.
Yeah.
Multiple points of view.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, all clear, which you mentioned, was huge for me. I think that's a beautiful book. Visit from the Goon Squad also, I mean, that's amazing. All of those polyphonic novels are beautiful. And I love voice too, so like, in form, I'm very interested in forms. Like Lisa Halliday's Asymmetry was very interesting.
Oh, I love that book.
Which has three, it's like a triptych. And like Alexander Chee's Edinburgh, I love. It's such a beautiful set name. And that's a first-person perspective, sort of a young man coming of age. But yeah, I love voice. So even I think more so than like a polyphonic novel, just these really voice-driven works spoke to me a lot.
Did you look at short stories too?
Yeah, I mean, I love Alice Munro, especially like in terms of characters, like roughly 30 pages, like huge inspiration for this. And Lori Moore was my thesis advisor at Vanderbilt, and her work meant a ton to me, especially in terms of humor and relationships between women. Deborah Eisenberg, short stories.
Okay, ready?
Yes, a huge thank you to the three of you ladies for giving us a wonderful evening. I have two questions, if that's okay. The first to Alina, congratulations, this is amazing. I'm 70,000 words into my first draft novel.
Congratulations!
Thank you so well. It's multiple POV, and this is my question. How do I not spend 8 years with my imaginary
Years with my multi-perspective novel.
I love my imaginary friends, and I just like, their stories are told, and then I'm delving back in. I want to spend more time with them. And if, reflecting, if you had any kind of thoughts or advice on that. And then secondly, if I could, if that's okay, to SJP, I wanted to ask, as you look at your imprint, how do you see storytelling and how are you carving that out, and what do you want this to accomplish in such a saturated space? As you said, there's a lot of other players, and how do you see
Okay, let's break it down. This is the one about how do you not spend 8 years, and then we're going to go to how do we do that one.
Oh man, I mean, don't start when you're like 22 and don't know what you're doing, maybe, or 22.
32.
But most practically, I really think that mapping out the perspectives was so helpful. I wish I had done that earlier. I don't know where my agent Duval is if she told me to do that, so thank you. But I think like having like a corkboard, something physical, if you're a visual person, I think to really just map out what you're doing. So you sort of can glance at something like, oh, I see where all these threads are going. So I was sort of splashing around for a while, not really knowing. So I would recommend that as a practical step.
And then how did you distinguish the press with all of this? How did you make it special?
I guess very simple answer, just because I want to make sure we have time and hopefully lots more questions for Alina, is to say I just will be brave and greedy enough publicly to just say I want more of the same experiences that I've had with really special writers from all different backgrounds, from all different parts of the world, who have very unique and special stories to tell that typically fit into the literary fiction category, my favorite. And I love debuts because so exciting to introduce what I think are really important new voices to the world of readers. So just as long as I can have that experience and I'm trusted in it and I can do right by the opportunity, I just want more of the same. Thank you. Best of luck to you.
Hello. Hi. Also, I just moved here from Alaska, so that's cool. I'm not from there, but I was clerking for a judge in Juneau.
Excellent, I'm sure we know many people in common.
I was gonna say, we should probably play the game. Are you from Juneau?
It's a big state, it's a small population.
I feel like I know half the state of Alaska. Okay, yes. So something I've always wondered since I was a kid, and then I was a high school teacher, my students would have perspectives on certain works that we would read that were entirely different from mine. And I remember me having bad hot takes that my teachers didn't agree with. And so I'm wondering, you have 3 different jobs in the writing world, and how do you react when somebody else interprets something that you've worked on in a very different way from you, and you don't want to tell them that they're wrong and they're not wrong, but
Are you?
that's my question. I think that's it.
Oh, yes.
Maybe kind of all of you, because you all come to the table from different perspectives.
Yeah, God, that's a big one. Because I am a teacher, I am a writer, and I do run a book club. And I have been an editor, a book editor, for a lot of time. That was my bread and butter. Well, I will say, I think there's an innate arrogance that I have. I'm proud of it. I don't think there's anything.
Women should be more arrogant, it's fine.
One by it, but I always am convinced that I know what's good. I'll read something, and I'll just like I read your book, and I'll say, oh, that's excellent, that's excellent. And there is a difference between good and bad. I don't believe in this thing where there's no good or bad. I just don't think that's true. And I think only in language do we think that's true, because all of us write. Not everybody can paint. You can really tell when someone's painting and you go, oh, that's cute. And that's good. Right? Or you see an athlete and they're running and they're breaking all the records and the other person's just throwing the ball. Like me. Maybe smoking a cigarette behind the bridge. Waiting for it to be over. But that can blind you. Because you're not 100% right. What you write is on the instinct, there's something there. There's a glimmer there. There's a glimmer, and that helps you as a writer. You can feel where the words start to just roll. Do you agree?
Yeah.
And you start going, okay, we're in the month. And maybe that might last 8 hours, it could last 2 hours. And when you're reading it as an editor, you go, yeah, it got interrupted. Comment. Or as a curator of a book club, you go, oh, we're in it. It's not exactly my language, but it might be the book club's language. And how we're going to reach, because I have a weird dark streak. Sometimes in Miss Winfrey's I was like, Lee, like those quirky dark things. And everybody dies at the end. So maybe it's not uplifting. The bee sting? Yeah, no, I didn't show her that, but some of the books, I go, or it's like all written in verse, and I'll go, oh, this is great. But how do we get all these people to read them? And then there's also the people that you just can't stand. And they're like, that was a great book. It was written in verse, in Gaelic. It was about the death of a bumblebee. And you loved it, except for I feel like maybe I have no plot. And I can't really stand on it, but I do think there's something to learn about it. I used to think there was something called the perfect book. And that perfect book was like, The Heart's a Lonely Hunter, by Person of Color. That book was Beloved by Toni Morrison. That book was The Notebook by Edward P. Jones. The book was The Vagrants by Union Lee. You should all go by that book. Nobody recognized how perfect a book that was. Where the language was married with the structure of the book. Where everything was perfectly, in the most beautiful sense, like the language, the story, the message, were in this beautiful package. Now I've gotten older, and I'm loving a mess. I'm loving not a hot mess, but a thing where maybe just truth is more important than anything else. a feeling is more important than anything else, however you got there. Even if you only got there for 50 pages and then the rest of the 250 was kind of boring or something, you know. Another perfect book is I keep renaming it. Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan.
Any clarification?
Yeah, she's doing it perfectly. But just because some people are able to put it all perfect together in that certain box narrative doesn't mean there's not lots of like wonderful, perfect emotion and feeling everywhere. So I guess that's what I was trying to say.
I think
Yeah,
the
I'm
other
wrong.
thing too about people's opinion, like you go, Alina will do what Alina will do, and she's so young. I think the thing you kind of learn, and it's not that you get better at it, you just kind of develop scar tissue, is you kind of know in advance, well, I'm going to work really hard and I'm going to do my best and it all matters and every single day matters and every detail matters, but I do know that by the time it's being offered to the public or the New York Times or anybody who has a published opinion too, they're going to tell me what I did. They'll be like, oh, because when you blah, and you're like, no, I didn't do that. That's not what I meant. You know, it happens to writers, it happens to playwrights, screenwriters, and directors, and certainly actors, and writers, and artists, you know, interpret it. But that's that's kind of the leap of faith. You have to take the risk, because you can't put the words in the mouths or in the tips of people, you know, like, so it's not that it's like, it still sometimes is painful to have it be so long, but there's simply nothing else you can do except stop offering your work on stage, on screen, in the pages, in a museum, in a gallery. But you know, and some people are better at it than others. Some people really don't care, or so they say.
Yeah, I think that's just part of making art, is that people aren't going to like some of what you do, and I think also like the least creative place to work from is when you're trying to anticipate criticism from all sides as well. You're not going to take any risks or do anything that maybe you feel is challenging. You're not quite sure you can do it perfectly. I don't think I would want to write anything that everyone loves. Like
It's also, were you scared? Like, at some point now we're like, oh my God, you wrote like really big truths, but were you scared?
And I'll just say, because she won't, even slightly perhaps, not really. And it doesn't matter, and if they weren't, then I'd be not mentioning it. But since they are, the reviews are insane for this book.
Tell us more.
They're not insane, they're correct. No, they're just glowing.
We should talk about the
big time lists.
Yeah.
And your lists, but you know, the reviews are hugely enthusiastic for the book. It's a dream. I mean, honestly, as a publisher, because it just helps us reach that many more people who should be reading this book, and it's not always the case, and it's hugely frustrating when you can't cross the footlights and you can't get the book in enough hands. But to see in the last 2 weeks, and certainly in the last 24 hours, what has happened to this book critically it's so deserving, but it doesn't always happen.
No, and honestly, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second, you guys. I'm going to get myself off for 1 second. Because it's difficult as a young woman coming out, even in our day and age. The adjectives are not given to the young women writers. They're not called genius, they're not called brilliant, they're not called luminous. This is reserved for other groups of people. And I really think, that's what I'm saying, like, who said these amazing things? We need to
We'll get you the list.
sitting at a mass alone. Because it's true. This was a masterpiece. I'll say it. You captured the imagination of the entire town with language that hung both the personal and the universal. It was a triumph. And I hope we all close that.
If you're still with us on the live stream, please buy a copy of this incredible debut in the link in the description. And then for those of us in person, we're going to have a signing line starting here, and Alina's going to sign her purple book, so please stick around. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much.
No, yeah,